Hey dear restless mind. Tonight, imagine a glow of firelight spilling across carved stone walls, the air heavy with incense and the faint bite of wine fermenting in clay jars. Silk curtains stir with the night breeze, brushing past brass lamps that sputter low flames. You're seated cross-legged on cool mosaic floors, surrounded by merchants whispering in strange tongues, Greek envoys fanning themselves with peacock feathers, and priests murmuring chants that sound like thunder contained in human throats. Beyond the palace, torches mark the edges of gardens where nightingales sing among pomegranate blossoms. Inside, you're not just a guest. You're a witness to a civilization that dazzled with wealth, terrified with rules, and carried habits that to them felt obvious, natural, almost holy. Yet to you, sitting here centuries later, feel absolutely upside down. You'd probably never make it through a single ancient Persian night. But don't worry, I'll guide you safely through. So before we go any further, if this quiet company helps, you can gently tap like and subscribe, but only if it feels right to your heart. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Maybe lying awake in New York or drifting in a quiet room in London. Drop your time and place below, so none of us feel alone tonight. Now, dim the lights, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin tonight's slow, strange journey, together here on Timeless Sleep. You open your eyes wider as the great king's court comes into focus. Darius, or perhaps Xerxes, depending on the century, sits on a golden throne raised high enough to make even the tallest noble look like a schoolchild waiting for permission to speak. His robe gleams like woven fire, embroidered with griffins mid-pounce. Around him, servants scurry with the silence of shadows. You try to remind yourself, this was a fairy tale empire, the place where roads stretched longer than your last Netflix binge, where postal couriers ran faster than your weekend Amazon delivery, and where the idea of a king wasn't just a man in charge. It was a cosmic appointment, as if the universe itself had emailed him the job offer. The first thing that startles you is how normal all of this felt to them. Persia's strict Zoroastrian worldview sorted every single thing into categories of pure and impure, orderly and chaotic. Fire, pure. Corpses, impure. Hair clippings, somehow impure too. Your bathroom sink would have been declared a crime scene. These weren't just quirky guidelines, they were the scaffolding of life, laws that defined whether you could touch water, eat bread, or sleep without guilt gnawing at your ribs. For Persians, purity wasn't just hand-washing before dinner. It was a cosmic war being fought with every sip, every breath, every sneeze politely hidden behind your sleeve. You glance at the floor. Even the tiles beneath you are rules in action. No one dares spit, no one dares drop crumbs, unless of course you wanted to risk divine punishment. Think about it. In a world without mop buckets and lemon-scented wipes, keeping the sacred fire undefiled wasn't just a housekeeping tip. It was a theological emergency. Priests guarded flame the way modern fans guard spoilers for a TV finale, with ferocious intensity. Imagine the awkwardness. Sneeze too close to a sacred fire, and you're suddenly the villain of the episode. And oh, those priests! They carried bundles of twigs, murmured long prayers, and kept jars of bull's urine handy. Yes, literally jars, sitting in temple corners like bottles of questionable kombucha. If you touched a corpse, stepped in shadow, or maybe just had an unlucky Tuesday, the priest would splash you with this pungent liquid as if it were the very bleach of heaven. To you, it smells like a prank gone wrong. To them, it was the cosmic reset button. Somewhere out there, a Persian teenager must have muttered, "Great, Dad, now I smell like the divine cow again," before storming off to sulk. But it wasn't just religious rules that shock you. Social expectations were equally bizarre by modern standards. Marriage could mean things your dating app bio never warned you about. Marrying close kin wasn't whispered gossip. It was advertised as a holy service, almost like recycling but with your family tree. Outsiders, especially the Greeks, were horrified. Yet Persians thought of it as cosmic reinforcement, keeping bloodlines strong and order unbroken. If you're shifting uncomfortably now, imagine being a Greek ambassador writing letters home about it. Dear Athens, you won't believe what's considered normal here. Look again at the palace feast spread before you. Golden trays hold lamb roasted with saffron, mountains of rice jewelled with pomegranate seeds, dates sticky as honey, and wines served in elaborate cups that gleam like miniature suns. The Persians loved their wine, but don't picture drunken bar fights. Wine was always mixed with water, carefully diluted so the night could stretch endlessly. Feasts lasted days with rounds of toasts that made you wish someone invented coffee already. Guests were expected to keep up, which meant enduring the ultimate drinking game. Don't collapse before the king notices. If you think your office happy hour is stressful, try one where the consequence of refusing a refill might be losing face before the empire. And while you're sipping, the court musicians strike up. Flutes trill, lutes hum, drums throb like a second heartbeat. Dancers sway with veils glinting in lamplight. But the real theatre isn't on stage, it's in the whispered games of the harem, the inner quarters of royal women. Hidden from sight, veiled and secluded, they still manage to steer politics, weaving influence through suns, gifts and whispers that rippled outward like stones dropped in a pond. Imagine an empire where gossip had more force than armies. One slip of the tongue could topple an alliance. Basically, mean girls, but with more gold and slightly fewer cafeteria trays. Even daily punishments looked like surreal performance art. A thief might lose his ears, a traitor might be bricked alive between walls, a liar might face trials by molten metal where a tongue burn was proof of guilt. Strange logic? Absolutely. But for Persians, justice wasn't about what you and I would call fairness. It was about purging chaos from the world, about proving you hadn't let the demons hitch a ride on your words. Think of it as Judge Judy, but with fire and way fewer commercials. You wander through the markets outside the palace walls. Here, everything dazzles and unsettles in equal measure. Perfumed oils, cinnamon, ivory chess pieces, bolts of turquoise-dyed silk. Traders from Babylon argue with camel drivers from Egypt. Spices thicken the air until your nose feels like it's doing gymnastics. Yet alongside the luxury sits superstition. Charms against snakes, amulets of turquoise to keep death away, chants whispered by magi who claim they can heal a fever by tying knots in wool. You half expect someone to offer you crocodile dung as a sunscreen sample, though that was more of an Egyptian specialty. Persians had their own oddities, like powdered halma plant for visions that sound suspiciously psychedelic. And there's the garden, the paradisa, the word that eventually becomes our paradise. High walls shield it from desert wind. Streams trickle from qanats, underground channels engineered with precision that would shame modern plumbing contractors. Roses bloom in symmetrical beds. Cypress trees line the paths like soldiers standing guard. Birds hop between fountains carved with lions. For Persians, this wasn't just landscaping. It was theology in flowers. The garden was order carved from chaos, heaven miniaturized for human enjoyment. You step inside and realize you're literally strolling through the original paradise, though you still have to sidestep the gardener yelling at kids who tried to climb a fig tree. What shocks you most is not one specific custom, but how normal it all felt to them. Towers of silence for the dead? Of course. Wine diluted with water, toasted until dawn? Why not? Ear mutilation as punishment? Standard paperwork? Sacred bull urine splashed as cleansing? Obviously. If you raised an eyebrow, they'd raise two right back at you, wondering why you looked so confused. That's the rhythm of Persia, a civilization that saw itself as guardian of cosmic order, while outsiders scribbled scandalized notes. And so, you sit there in the palace, watching a servant refill your cup. The music swells, the torches flare. Outside, desert winds rattle at the garden walls. You shift in your seat, realizing that what was shocking to the Greek ambassador, what makes you smirk nervously now, was simply Tuesday night in ancient Persia. The torches flicker lower as the night drags on, and a hush settles over the court like a velvet cloak. You follow a procession of priests out of the palace, through winding alleys, until the scent of spice and wine is replaced by something sharper, dry air laced with dust, and the distant rustle of wings. Ahead, looming against the star-pinned sky, rises a circular tower. It looks like a giant stone drum, squat and unadorned, utterly silent except for the faint creak of wooden gates. This is no palace, no temple, no amphitheatre. This is a dakhma, the Tower of Silence, where Persians brought their dead not to bury, not to burn, but to give over to the vultures. You hesitate. Every instinct begs you to step back. You're conditioned to think of graves with flowers, of tombstones with names, of urns on mantles. Here there is none of that. The Zoroastrian priests believed earth and fire were sacred. too pure to be contaminated by death. A corpse was not just a body, it was a pollutant, a dangerous vessel carrying Nasu, the demon of decay. To bury a body in soil would defile the ground forever. To cremate it would be to insult fire, the very essence of purity. So what to do? Build a tower, lift the corpse skyward, and let the birds of the air solve the problem. You climb the narrow steps. At the top, moonlight reveals a flat, open platform surrounded by low stone walls. Laid out in circles like grotesque flower petals are bodies. Some are fresh, wrapped in thin cloth. Others are picked clean, bleached white, under months of desert sun. In the centre is a deep stone pit, the ossuary. Here, after the vultures finished their work, priests swept the bones inward with long metal rakes, like janitors of mortality. No names, no markers, just bones tumbling together in anonymity. Rest in peace wasn't exactly the phrase, more like rest efficiently with avian assistance. The birds circle overhead, dark shapes against the stars. With a sudden rush, one swoops down, landing on a chest with a thud. His beak rips into flesh with the nonchalance of someone tearing open a snack bag. Another follows, then another, until the platform is alive with flapping, tearing, snapping. The sound is a grim orchestra, feathers rustling like cymbals, bones cracking like percussion. You shrink back, but to the priest this is sacred duty. The vultures are helpers of order, cleaning what must be cleaned, carrying pollution away from the living. Imagine your local recycling program except with carrion birds and human femurs. To the Persians this was normal, even beautiful, a clean way to dispose of impurity, a cycle that honoured both earth and fire. To outsiders, though, it was horror incarnate. Greek travellers wrote with a shudder about exposing bodies to dogs and birds. Later invaders, unfamiliar with the theology, mistook the practice for barbarity. But here, among the priests in white robes, you realise it is ritual precision, a strange choreography of death. The ritual began long before the birds. When someone died, the family wasn't allowed to touch the body directly. That would spread Nasu. Instead, special corpse bearers, almost like professional movers but with more chanting, carried the dead on iron stretchers. Iron, after all, was the metal demons feared most. The family followed at a distance, weeping, but careful not to brush too close. Even the house of the deceased was considered tainted, cleaned with ash, swept with ritual tools, sometimes abandoned altogether. Sorry kids, new apartment. The old one is demon-occupied now. Up in the tower, the priest recited prayers as the corpse was laid down. They sprinkled the body with powdered lime, a kind of spiritual disinfectant. Then they stepped back, leaving the rest to the birds. Days later, when only bones remained, those were pushed into the central pit where rainwater would slowly dissolve them into the earth. It sounds unsettling to you, but to them it was the most respectful way to avoid contaminating sacred elements. Ashes didn't pollute the fire, bones in the pit didn't poison the ground, order restored, demons defeated. Imagine explaining this to your modern neighbour. We don't bury our dead, we just kind of outsource them to vultures. Cue the horrified silence, followed by a hasty Google search for property values in a new neighbourhood. Yet for Persians, this practice endured for centuries, even millennia. Towers stood on hilltops near major cities, stark against the horizon. Families knew them as familiar landmarks. Children grew up with their silhouettes carved against the sky, as ordinary as seeing a steeple or a clock tower today. And here's the strangest part. To Persians, the tower was not a place of fear. It wasn't haunted or cursed. It was simply functional. Just as you don't tremble at the sight of a recycling bin, they didn't shudder at the sight of the dakma. You can almost picture two friends walking past one on their way to market, one remarking casually, "Looks like they've had a busy week up there." Morbid. Absolutely. Normal. Entirely. Standing on the platform, you watch as a priest lifts his voice in chant. The sound rolls across the stones, low and steady, mingling with the wing beats above. The vultures don't flinch. They're part of the liturgy. One bird, full and satisfied, hops lazily toward the edge and takes flight. Another replaces it instantly, beak already busy. The cycle doesn't pause, not for one body, not for 10. This is continuity, order, the endless struggle against impurity. And somewhere in that rhythm, the Persians found peace. A Of course, peace is relative. Imagine being the new guy assigned corpse bearer duty. Congratulations, son, you're joining the sacred guild. Here's your iron stretcher and a big bucket of lime. Oh, and watch out for the beaks, one suspects. There were no long waiting lists for that job, and yet it carried honour. Someone had to defend the world from Nasu. Someone had to make sure demons didn't seep into the soil. The Greeks, always ready with biting commentary, found the practice baffling. Herodotus, peering through the lens of cultural superiority, described Persians as exposing their dead to dogs and birds. He left out the theology, the sacred reasoning, the centuries of tradition. To him, it was barbarism. To Persians, it was cosmic maintenance. Think of it as two people arguing about whether pineapple belongs on pizza, both passionately convinced, both utterly baffled by the other side. You shift uneasily as the priests file out of the tower. They leave the birds to their work, closing the gate behind them. In the silence that follows, you realise how different this feels from the quiet of a cemetery. No carved names, no epitaphs, no beloved mother, 432 to 498 BCE. Just silence broken by wings, anonymity written in bones. And oddly, it works. The land is clean, the fire is pure, and the cycle continues without end. As you descend the tower steps, the night air presses close. You think about your own rituals of mourning, photographs, prayers, tombstones tended with flowers. Imagine stripping it all away, leaving only sky, stone, and vultures. It sounds harsh, almost cruel. Yet for the Persians it was mercy, freeing the soul without poisoning the elements. Mercy can wear strange masks, can't it? The next morning you pass by the tower again. In daylight it looks almost peaceful, just a circular wall rising above scrubby hills. A shepherd guides his flock nearby, unbothered by what happens inside. Children chase each other in dust clouds, laughter ringing out as if death weren't a tenant a few yards away. Life and death share the same hilltop with no quarrel between them. You glance back once more. A vulture lifts itself skyward, wings spread wide, climbing higher until it vanishes into the blue. And suddenly you see it as they must have seen it. Not grotesque, not horrifying, but strangely elegant. The body lifted back into the air, carried by the creatures of the sky, leaving the earth and fire undefiled. In its own unsettling way, it is beautiful. The dawn breaks across the Persian plateau, painting the mountains with ribbons of pale gold. But instead of incense and bird cries, you catch a different smell. Sharp, acrid, unmistakable. A priest walks past you, carrying a bronze jug with reverence, as though it contained the most precious perfume in the empire. You lean closer and instantly regret it. This is not perfume. This is Gomez, consecrated bull's urine. Yes, you heard right. In ancient Persia, this liquid was not a joke, not an accident, but a weapon against corruption itself. To you, it's nose-wrinkling horror. To them, it was divine bleach. The problem, as Zoroastrian priests explained, was Nasu, the pollution released by corpses and death. Imagine a demon that didn't stab or scream but simply seeped into the air the moment a body stilled. Touch a corpse, step too close, or even carry the same tools as a corpse bearer, and you were infected. Not in the take a day off work way, in the you might drag the entire cosmos into chaos way. Enter the temple's secret stash, bull's urine, stored carefully in jars like prized vintage wine, except this one was not going to win any Michelin stars. Picture the ritual. You've brushed against a dead body. Unlucky, but it happens. A priest leads you into a courtyard, sets you on your knees, and begins a liturgy as formal as any wedding. He dips his hand into the sacred liquid and pours it slowly across your hands, your arms, sometimes even your face. The smell clings like an overly affectionate relative at a family reunion. The priest chants, waves bundles of twigs, and sprinkles ashes into the mix. When he's done, you're drenched, smelling like an abandoned cowshed, but cosmically pure. Congratulations, the demons have been washed off. Shower optional, though strongly advised. It didn't stop with humans. Corpses themselves were bathed in Gomez before reaching the Tower of Silence. Think about that. You die, your family mourns, and before the birds get their turn, your body is ceremonially rinsed in cow's urine. You wanted flowers, you got farmyard disinfectant. One suspects that if ancient Persians had known about lemon-scented cleaning products, they still would have picked the cows. After all, it wasn't about freshness, it was about cosmic order. Even tools used near death, knives, stretchers, clothes, had to be purified with the same treatment. Imagine a blacksmith hammering a sword by day, then being told he couldn't touch his hammer again until it was properly dunked in bull's urine because his cousin had borrowed it to help move a body. There's workplace contamination policies, and then there's this. And here's the kicker. The priest didn't treat it like drudgery. The ceremony of padyab, purification, was solemn, sacred, filled with long chants. Every pour of liquid, every sprinkle of ash, every prayer had a purpose. It wasn't, ugh, this smells. It was the balance of the universe depends on this very splash. When you imagine that level of seriousness, it almost becomes, dare we say it, impressive. Like watching someone scrub a toilet with the dignity of a high priest. Now, outsiders were baffled. Greek writers, with their usual flair for mockery, laughed at the idea. To them, cleanliness was about baths, olive oil, and scraping dead skin with bronze tools. Imagine a Greek merchant hearing that Persians preferred to dump urine on corpses. He probably spat out his wine in disbelief, muttering, "These barbarians need a good bath, not a cow." Yet for Persians, the Greeks were the odd ones. You wash with oil, you smear yourself like roast lamb, and you think we're strange? Perspective really is everything. What strikes you as you watch is the thoroughness. There was no half-hearted rinse. Ritual required cycles. 3 times, 9 times, always odd numbers considered spiritually potent. Each round had to be accompanied by verses spoken precisely. The priest could not skip, could not rush, miss a word, miscount a pour, and the whole purification was invalid. It's like cosmic customer service. One wrong keystroke, and the complaint has to be refiled. You glance at the priest's face. He isn't grimacing. He doesn't pinch his nose. To him, this liquid is sanctified, the very essence of purity, collected from specially tended bulls raised near temples. These animals weren't random farm beasts. They were sacred providers, living symbols of strength. Their urine, bizarre as it sounds to you, carried divine weight. You might gag. He bows his head. 2 worlds collide in that jug, and it wasn't limited to corpses. Everyday pollution, if you touched something unclean, if you broke a taboo, might also require the same ritual. It's almost like a cosmic spa treatment, if spas smelled like barnyards. You picture a Persian man returning home, his wife scolding him. You went near the fire with dirty shoes again. Off to the temple with you. Don't come back until you're dripping and demon-free. The logic ran deep. Zoroastrianism divided the world into Asha, truth, order, purity, and Druj, lies, chaos, filth. Every act tipped the scales. Washing with water alone wasn't enough. Water itself could be corrupted. But Gomez, that was the chosen weapon, the divine solvent against Druj. Think of it as their equivalent of hazmat gear. Yes, it smelled. Yes, it was uncomfortable. But in their worldview, it worked. You can't help but wonder about the social side effects. Did purified people walk around reeking for days? Was it considered a badge of honor like, ah yes, he smells like the temple, truly devout? Or was it more like sitting next to someone on the bus who hasn't discovered deodorant? The records don't say. Perhaps it was both. Pride for some, nuisance for others. The cosmic burden of sitting through a feast with Uncle Pure and Stinky. There's a darker note too. If someone refused purification, if they touched a corpse and ignored the rituals, they weren't just careless. They were dangerous. Laws punished them harshly. Refusing Gomez meant siding with demons, endangering the community. In some texts, penalties included lashes, fines, even death. Imagine being dragged before a judge. Your crime, citizen, not letting the priest douse you with sacred pee. And yet, in context, it was deadly serious. The survival of purity was survival of the cosmos. You watch one ritual play out. A young man, pale and trembling, kneels while priests chant. He had helped carry his grandmother's body. His robe is sprinkled, his hair soaked. The liquid drips down his cheeks like sweat. His eyes squeeze shut, perhaps from the sting, perhaps from shame. When the chanting ends, he rises, clean in spirit if not in scent. His family embraces him carefully. They smile, relieved, grateful, certain that balance has been restored. To them it isn't absurd, it is holy. And as odd as it seems, it worked in their world. The empire flourished. Roads stretched across continents, gardens bloomed in deserts, kings ruled with terrifying grandeur, all under the guardianship of priests with jugs of consecrated gomez. You might laugh, you might gag, but in their eyes, this was civilization at its finest. Walking back from the courtyard, you can't shake the image. Rows of bronze jugs, priests chanting, people kneeling, demons supposedly washed away. It lingers in your nose, in your imagination, in the quiet realization that history is full of practices we label shocking, only because we're seeing them through our own filters. To the Persians, they were simply surviving, defending the order of the universe one pore at a time. The morning sun creeps higher, casting slanted beams across the temple courtyard, and you're still reeling from the last ritual when another odd practice drifts into view. This time it isn't death that's the threat, it's the leftovers of life itself. A priest approaches carrying a small bundle in his palm. At first glance it looks harmless, just strands of hair and a few pairings of fingernail. But to a Zoroastrian priest these scraps are not trivial trash. They are potential time bombs of impurity, little packets of danger that demons might exploit if left lying around. You thought your bathroom sink was messy. In ancient Persia, it was practically a battlefield. Imagine the rules. Cut your nails, trim your hair, and suddenly you've produced fragments that must be treated like hazardous waste. You don't simply sweep them into the corner. You don't toss them to the pigs. You don't, heaven forbid, let them wash down into the river. Each strand, each clipping had to be handled with ritual care, as if your split ends were plotting a cosmic coup. So here's the process. First, the cuttings were washed in the same consecrated bull's urine. Yes, the cosmic detergent made another appearance. Even your fingernails needed a divine rinse. After that, they were burned on special shards of pottery, not in the main fire that would pollute the holy flame, but in a controlled secondary fire that could take the hit. You picture the scene, a priest carefully dropping tiny nail clippings onto glowing pottery, chanting solemn verses as they shriveled. The seriousness is so intense you almost laugh. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather here today to send this thumbnail to heaven. The ashes, once cooled, were buried in pits dug far from sacred spaces, not near rivers, not near gardens, not near the fire, temple. You couldn't risk a stray nail contaminating the goddess Aepa, the sacred waters. You couldn't let hair drift near flame, you couldn't toss it on a rubbish heap. Demons loved leftovers. To the Persians, careless disposal was like leaving the fridge door open in August. Chaos rushed in instantly. You can't help but imagine the daily grind of this. Parents scolding children, "Don't you dare leave that hair on the floor. Do you want to doom the family to cosmic disorder?" Husbands nagging wives about nail clippings, wives rolling their eyes, muttering, "If the demons want them, let them take them." And yet, every household had to obey. Priests checked, laws enforced. To break the rule was to invite pollution that spread invisibly, infecting family, home, even village. Think about how different this feels from modern life. Today, hair and nails are almost meaningless. They litter salon floors, get swept into bins, vanish into drains. Maybe a child collects them in a prank. Maybe a witch in folklore uses them for charms. But in Persia, these scraps were loaded with cosmic significance. They carried the essence of the body, vulnerable to demonic capture. Carelessness wasn't just gross, it was spiritually dangerous. The symbolism goes deeper. Fire, water, earth, all were sacred. They had to be kept clean at all costs. Hair and nails, once cut, became dead matter. They no longer carried life's spark. Like corpses, they were now pollutants. It didn't matter that they seemed harmless. In the Zoroastrian worldview, every fragment of death was a crack where Druj, the demon of lies and filth, could slip in. That worldview didn't leave much room for casual clutter. Imagine being the teenager caught leaving clippings in the corner. Congratulations, son, you've personally endangered the cosmic order. Of course, the Greeks had their say. Herodotus, ever the reporter with a hint of smirk, noted the Persian obsession with ritual purity. He found it baffling, even comical. Hair and nails treated like hazardous material. To the Greeks, this was paranoia. To the Persians, it was devotion. Again, two worlds colliding. Think of it as one culture saying, "It's just a sandwich crust," and the other shouting, That crust could summon demons if not burned properly. Both convinced, both appalled at the other. Now, here's the cheeky detail. Some texts hint that people stored their cuttings in little containers until they could be ritually destroyed. Picture a Persian lady carefully sweeping her hair into a clay pot after combing, sealing it with wax and setting it on a shelf. It's like a bizarre time capsule of every bad haircut you ever had. Imagine archaeologists digging up one of those jars centuries later. Behold, the holy Tupperware of ancient Persia. The rituals could also vary depending on occasion. A soldier cutting his hair before campaign. Those cuttings might be treated with extra care, ritually burned with prayers for protection. A pregnant woman trimming nails. Her scraps might receive additional purifications to shield both mother and child. Everyday grooming became a ritual interface with the cosmic battlefield. You thought you were just clipping your nails. They thought you were neutralizing a demonic threat. And then there's the practical side. Burning and burying hair and nails also kept them from pests, vermin, or being used in magic by enemies. After all, across many ancient cultures, hair and nail fragments were prized in witchcraft, believed to bind or harm the person they came from. Maybe Persians weren't so off base. Perhaps their rules were both cosmic theology and common sense caution. Better safe than sorry when your neighbour's witch could be weaving a doll from your beard trimmings. Imagine the life of the poor priests tasked with this work. Day after day, tiny piles of clippings and strands of hair passed into their hands. They chanted, they burned, they buried. No glory, no spectacle, just endless purification of the world's most unglamorous leftovers. You wonder if one ever sighed, I trained 20 years for this. Yet, in their eyes, it mattered. Each ritual was a victory, small but crucial, in the eternal war of Asher order against Druj. You wander through a Persian household in your mind. A barber carefully sweeps his floor into a jar. A mother scolds her child for biting nails and spitting them on the ground. A priest arrives once a week, collecting bundles to dispose of properly. Neighbours gossip. The family down the street didn't burn theirs properly last month. Their goat fell sick. Coincidence? I think not. It sounds absurd until you realise it's structured daily life, weaving the cosmic into the domestic. And here's the subtle beauty. In this obsession with purity, Persians believed they were protecting not just themselves, but the entire world. A single clipping left in the wrong place wasn't just a private mistake, it was a cosmic crack. That belief gave weight to even the tiniest actions. It made life a constant liturgy, where trimming nails was as sacred as prayer. You look at your own nails now, suddenly aware of their silent growth. Imagine being bound to treat every trimming like a spiritual decision. The thought is exhausting, but also strangely humbling. To Persians, there was no division between sacred and mundane. The battlefield stretched into every corner, even onto your comb. So when the priest drops another burnt scrap into the burial pit, you understand, this wasn't superstition in their eyes. It was duty. It was faith. It was the conviction that nothing, not even the tiniest strand of hair, should fall to chaos. And in that devotion, however strange it smells to your modern mind, you glimpse the fierce determination of a civilization that refused to let demons win. Not in palaces, not in battlefields, not even in the barbershop. You step away from the hearth where clippings smouldered and follow the path of a priest leading you toward the river. The air shifts, cooler, fresher, and you hear the rush of water long before you see it. At first glance, it seems simple. A ribbon of blue threading across the dusty plain, birds skimming the surface, reeds whispering in the breeze. But in ancient Persia, rivers weren't just rivers. They were living goddesses, holy beings whose health determined the fate of the land. And water wasn't merely wet. It was divine, sacred, and dangerously vulnerable. The goddess Apa was imagined as flowing life itself, a mother of fertility, the purifier of all things. Yet paradoxically, water could be corrupted with terrifying ease. Drop a corpse into it, spill filth, even let nail clippings drift into the current, and the goddess fell sick. Pollution wasn't symbolic, it was literal in their worldview. A river could become ill, weakened, less capable of sustaining crops, animals, and humans. Think of it as a cosmic plumbing system, except every leak was a spiritual disaster. Priests guarded waterways with intensity you usually reserve for Wi-Fi routers. They patrolled riverbanks, ensuring no one dared to defile the flow. A farmer whose ox died near the banks might face harsh penalties if he allowed the carcass to touch the water. Children were taught never to play too close, lest their dirt or spit slide into Apa's body. Imagine the fear of accidentally sneezing into the river. Congratulations, child, you've just made the goddess ill. The rules extended to wells, cisterns, even puddles after rain. Water had to be shielded, covered, kept pure. If someone died in a river, drowned in an accident perhaps, that waterway was considered cursed. Elaborate rituals had to be performed before anyone dared use it again. Ash would be cast, fire lit, prayers chanted, and yes, Gomez poured to disinfect. The same pungent liquid that purified corpses now served as detergent for rivers. A paradox. Polluting water with cow urine was acceptable because it cleansed the greater demon lurking within. You can almost hear the debates. Did we fix the river, or just make it smell like a barn? If the pollution was minor, purification rites could last days. Priests circled the banks, chanting through the night. Ash was sprinkled like holy soap flakes. Bundles of balsam twigs, symbols of order, were waved rhythmically, tapping the rhythm of creation itself. Each act rebuilt Apa's strength, like medicine restoring a sick patient. If major pollution occurred, say, a body decomposing in a well, penalties were harsh. The offender could be whipped with lashes, fined, or forced into servitude for priests. Water was too essential to allow negligence. Better to ruin one man than let an entire village drink corruption. You crouch by the riverbank, cupping water in your hands. To you it's simple, refreshment. But you notice how carefully others move. No one splashes, no one spits. A girl washes her clothes, but she stays knee-deep on the bank, never wringing the cloth directly into the current. Another man leads his goats to drink, careful they lap without stepping too far in. This isn't just etiquette, it's reverence. You realise you're sitting at the edge of a goddess, and the mood is almost like church. The legal codes confirm this obsession. Ancient Persian law books specified lashes for anyone who dirtied water. 50 strokes for urinating near a stream, more for throwing waste. And if you deliberately drowned a dog, one of their sacred animals, in a river, the punishment was multiplied. Imagine a judge today reading that aloud. Case number 47. The accused spat in the village well. Sentence, 75 lashes. Justice and plumbing rolled into one. Of course, water wasn't just sacred in the abstract. Persia's geography made it urgent. Much of the empire stretched across dry plateaus and deserts. Crops thrived only through ingenious irrigation. Qanats, those underground channels tunneled for miles, carrying cool water from mountain aquifers to fields and gardens. These qanats were marvels of engineering, silent rivers flowing beneath your feet. But they too were guarded by ritual law. Drop something impure into a qanat, and you weren't just polluting water. You were sabotaging the empire's lifeline. Punishments could be brutal, even capital. The sanctity of water spilled into mythology. In hymns of the Avesta, Apa is praised as luminous, strong, ever-flowing. The rivers were her daughters, racing to cleanse the world of filth. Priests sang of them as protectors against demons, warriors whose weapon was freshness. You can almost hear the chant on the wind, Advisura Anahita, mighty and spotless, flowing with life-giving bounty. Imagine if every time you turned on the tap you whispered a hymn to the goddess within the pipes. For Persians, it was never just water. It was always divinity in motion, and yet, despite the reverence, there was fear. Water was pure, but it was also a fragile purity, always threatened. A drowned animal, a careless human, a stray hair, all could turn blessing into curse. That fragility meant life was lived with constant caution. Fetching water wasn't trivial. It was ritual. You had to be mindful of where you stood, how you poured, what touched the vessel. Even a thirsty traveller refilling his skin had to tread carefully. Drink, yes. Pollute, never. Outsiders often mocked this vigilance. The Greeks, bathing in open baths and splashing freely, thought Persians uptight. Herodotus sneered at their obsession with rules, seeing paranoia where Persians saw piety. Yet to live in their climate, reliant on delicate qanats and rivers, perhaps such caution was wisdom disguised as superstition. Lose one clean river, and you risked famine. Pollute one well, and you doomed a village. Practicality and theology fused until they were indistinguishable. You picture a day of crisis. A calf falls into a well. Panic spreads. The family can't simply drink elsewhere. Water is too scarce. The priests are summoned. They arrive with chants, twigs, jars of gomez, ashes carried in brass. They lower ropes, haul the carcass out, and then spend days circling, purifying, chanting. Families wait anxiously, parched, until the rites conclude. Finally, the priests declare the well cleansed, Apa restored. The people drink again, relieved, grateful, whispering thanks to the goddess. To you it's ritual drama. To them, it's survival. And then there's the punishments. Imagine being caught sneaking waste into a stream under cover of night. You're hauled before a magistrate, charged not with littering but with wounding a goddess. Witnesses testify. Priests condemn. The sentence is severe. You're lashed, humiliated, branded as one who betrayed Apa. Your name drags in gossip for years. There goes the man who tried to poison the river. Social death, as painful as the physical stripes. What lingers in your mind is how personal it all felt. Rivers weren't resources. They were beings you could wound or heal. When Persians poured ash into polluted waters, they weren't just cleaning. They were nursing Apa back to health. When they punished a polluter, they weren't fining a lawbreaker. They were avenging an insulted goddess. Every ripple carried moral weight. Every drop was a battlefield in the endless war of order versus chaos. You lean closer to the water, catching your reflection wavering. You think of your own world, where taps gush, drains swallow, and rivers are often forgotten until they flood or dry. For Persians, forgetfulness wasn't possible. Water demanded attention, demanded respect, demanded ritual. In their eyes, that vigilance kept the world alive, and so you sit by the riverbank listening to the murmur of current and chant, realizing once again how strange, how strict, how strangely beautiful their worldview was. The goddess flows on, guarded by priests, feared by children, praised in hymns, kept clean by punishments and prayers alike. Shocking. To you, yes. To them it was simply how life must be lived, a covenant with flowing divinity, drop by drop. The river's murmur fades behind you as you follow the trail toward a bustling courtyard where the sound of voices takes on a sharper edge. This isn't a market with figs and dates, nor a temple with chants and incense. It is a courtroom. Though if you're picturing robes, gavels, and tidy stacks of parchment, think again. Here in ancient Persia, justice wasn't just spoken by men, it was revealed by the gods, sometimes in ways that make you shiver, sometimes in ways that make you laugh nervously, hoping you'll never be accused of anything serious. A scribe, reed pen in hand, records testimony on clay tablets, around. Him, petitioners argue, gesturing with frantic hands. But when the priest-judges call for silence, it isn't to deliver a verdict by reasoned debate. It is to announce that the accused will prove innocence or guilt, not through words but through ordeal. Truth, in this empire, wasn't discovered with lawyers' speeches. It was extracted with fire, metal, and a very unnerving sense of divine theatre. You watch as a man is led forward. He has been accused of theft, not caught red-handed, not seen by witnesses, as merely accused. And in a society where lying was considered a spiritual contagion, how do you prove truth? The priests bring forth a shallow metal dish, glowing from the coals. Into it they pour molten brass, shimmering, bubbling like liquid sun. The accused is told to plunge his hand into the metal and retrieve a small stone resting inside. Your stomach clenches. Surely this can't be serious. But the priests nod solemnly. The logic is simple. If he is innocent, the holy fire will spare him. If guilty, the burns will mark him as liar. To them this isn't cruelty. It is fairness. Letting the gods judge directly. To you, it's like watching a cosmic game show where the prize is not dying of infection. The man hesitates, sweat shining on his brow. The crowd leans in, murmuring. He reaches forward, thrusts his hand in, and yanks it out with the stone clutched tight. The priests wrap his arm in linen, chanting. The trial isn't finished yet, for days afterward he'll be watched. If the burns heal clean, it means truth protected him. If the wounds fester, it is guilt made visible. Imagine waiting for your court verdict while your arm slowly blisters. Justice by dermatology. It wasn't always molten metal. Sometimes the ordeal was fire walking, crossing a bed of embers with bare feet, trusting the gods to shield the innocent. Other times it was swallowing a potion laced with sulphur or ash, the priest chanting over it. If the accused vomited quickly and survived, innocence was declared. If he choked or worsened, well, chaos had caught him. Think of it as a medieval lie detector, except the machine could set you on fire. And here's the bizarre twist. Persians didn't see these ordeals as terrifying. They saw them as merciful. Instead of endless disputes, gossip and accusations, the divine verdict cut through. Fire did not lie. The gods did not misjudge. To them, this was swifter, purer, less messy than lawyers. To you, it looks like a lawsuit handled by pyrotechnics. The obsession with truth ran deeper than just trials. In Zoroastrianism, lying was among the gravest sins. To tell an untruth wasn't just rude, it was siding with Druj, the demonic force of deceit. A liar was polluting the very fabric of the universe. That's why ordeals mattered. They weren't simply about the accused. They were cosmic checks, ensuring truth itself wasn't undermined. Imagine if every fib about forgetting to water the plants risked you being marched over hot coals. Suddenly, honesty seems a lot more appealing. You look around the courtyard, another case begins. This time, it is a woman accused of poisoning her neighbour. The priests don't reach for molten brass. Instead, they bring out a ritual oath. She places her hand near a sacred fire, swearing her innocence aloud. If she lies, the fire, living, divine, will mark her eventually. Maybe not instantly, but illness, misfortune, or disaster would prove her guilt in time. The community believes this as firmly as you believe the sun will rise tomorrow. The fire is not fooled. The Greeks, of course, were scandalized. Herodotus and others reported these ordeals with a mix of fascination and disgust. To them, law was about argument, precedent, civic debate. Persians seemed to hand everything to fate and flame. Yet, in fairness, Greek courts weren't paragons of rationality either. They relied on rhetoric and oracles, and juries of hundreds swayed by speeches. Perhaps Persians simply chose a different theatre, less shouting, more burning. The punishments that followed could be severe. If ordeal proved guilt, penalties ranged from mutilation to death. Thieves might lose ears or noses, branded forever. Traitors could be flayed, skin stretched as warning. Less dramatic crimes earned lashings or fines, though the fines weren't coins, often livestock, grain or service. But even in punishment, the theme remained. Justice had to cleanse impurity, not just deter crime. Every lash, every cut, every ordeal was framed as cosmic housekeeping. You picture yourself living in that world. Would you ever dare to lie? To steal? To spread gossip? Maybe you'd think twice before pocketing an extra fig at the market if you knew a priest might later hand you a steaming ladle of brass. Even sarcasm could feel risky. Nice sandals might sound like mockery, and suddenly you're gulping sulphur water before a crowd. And yet, beneath the severity there was structure. Courts were organised, records kept, witnesses called. It wasn't all ordeal and fire, but the threat of ordeal loomed always, the ultimate tiebreaker. When humans couldn't decide, the gods were summoned. In that way, Persian justice blended practicality with ritual awe. A thief could be tried like anywhere else, but the possibility of molten brass hovering in the background kept everyone honest. The people, oddly, seemed reassured by this. Ordeals, though terrifying to you, gave closure to them. Disputes ended quickly. Verdicts carried weight, unquestioned. No one could accuse the judge of bias when the gods themselves had spoken. It was brutal fairness, packaged in flame and chant. As you watch another trial unfold, you realise the courtyard is both theatre and temple. Justice here is not about individual rights, but about preserving cosmic balance. To lie is not to inconvenience a neighbour, but to wound creation. To steal is not to take property, but to unleash chaos. Each verdict is less about the accused and more about defending the empire's alignment with truth. When the session ends, the crowd disperses, murmuring prayers as they go. Some leave satisfied, others uneasy. You linger, unsettled. To you, the ordeals feel barbaric, unfair, frightening. To them, they were normal, even necessary. Once again, what shocks your modern sense of justice was, for them, simply Tuesday's docket. You glance at the fire pit one last time, its embers glowing faintly. Somewhere in those coals, Persians saw honesty itself burning steady. Somewhere in that heat, they trusted that lies would blister away. And as strange as it seems, in their world of purity and pollution, order and chaos, that faith was the foundation of law. The heat of the courtroom embers still clings to your skin as you wander back into the palace gardens, and yet the next shock doesn't come from fire or punishment. It comes from love, or rather from what Persians considered perfectly acceptable, even holy, in love and marriage. You think you've seen oddities already: vultures eating the dead, priests with jars of urine, ordeals by molten brass. But here comes a practice that rattled even the jaded Greek ambassadors. Close-kin marriages, not only permitted but praised. Yes, Persians revered a type of union called zwedada, which meant marriage between next of kin. Brother and sister, mother and son, father and daughter, alliances that to your modern ears sound like whispered scandal, were, in their eyes, acts of cosmic devotion. You can almost hear your own inner voice groan. Wait, that was normal? But to them, it wasn't just normal, it was sacred. The Zoroastrian worldview framed kin marriage as reinforcing cosmic order. Families united in tight circles, preventing dilution, preserving purity. To marry a stranger was good, to marry kin was better, to marry very close kin was the best, almost like joining your bloodlines into a fortress against chaos. They believed such unions pleased the gods, strengthened the community, and defended against the creeping corruption of Druge. Imagine your mother setting you up on a date and proudly announcing, "He's your cousin, second best option, but if your sister is free, even better." Greeks and later Romans recoiled. Herodotus wrote with a mixture of horror and fascination, scribbling down tales of Persians marrying sisters without shame. Other sources gasped at rumours of royal fathers marrying daughters and brothers keeping sisters as wives. To outsiders, it was monstrous. To Persians, it was cosmic housekeeping. The closer the union, the greater the merit. Of course, context matters. Not every Persian practiced this, and not every Zoroastrian family arranged sibling weddings. But the texts celebrate it loudly. Priests wrote hymns praising those who dared, declaring rewards in heaven. Some records even claim that marrying your mother was the highest deed of all, a thought that sends modern minds spinning into disbelief. Yet again, perspective flips everything. To them, this wasn't taboo breaking, it was salvation. Picture a royal court. A young prince is betrothed to his sister. The ceremony is lavish: garlands, wine, music. Priests chant blessings, declaring this union a shield against chaos. Guests applaud, throwing flowers. You, standing awkwardly in the corner, want to sink through the floor. Your modern sense screams scandal. Their sense beams virtue. Which is stranger, their acceptance, or your shock centuries later? The logic wasn't only theological. Politics played a role. Royal dynasties used close-kin marriage to preserve power. By marrying within, they kept bloodlines pure, alliances internal. Pharaohs in Egypt did it for similar reasons, and Persians at times mirrored that strategy. To keep power from leaking outward, you folded it back inward. The harem's politics, already a storm of rivalries, only tightened when wives and sisters were the same people. It sounds like a soap opera written by someone who had far too much wine. And then there was the common folk. While kings and nobles flaunted extreme unions, ordinary families might practice milder versions. Cousin marriage was especially common, praised as virtuous. A girl betrothed to her cousin wasn't scandalous, she was considered blessed. Villagers whispered admiration, not disgust. One can imagine mothers boasting at the well, "My daughter wed her cousin, such purity, such fortune." But let's not romanticize. For many women, these marriages weren't choices but obligations. To refuse was to defy cosmic order, to risk the scorn of priests, to shame family. Love as you know it, free, individual, romantic, barely factored in. Affection might grow after, or not at all. What mattered was alignment with the great battle of purity versus chaos. Imagine sitting in your village, trimming nails with care, and hearing the priest preach that marrying kin was the holiest deed you could do. The pressure must have been immense. Who dares to resist when heaven itself is promised as reward? And so, generation after generation, the practice remained woven into life, simultaneously shocking to outsiders and natural to insiders. The myths reinforced it. In Zoroastrian cosmology, the first human pair were brother and sister, marrying to populate the world. Their union wasn't sinful but heroic, a model for later generations. Priests retold the story as proof. What the first humans did, you too must emulate. When your worldview starts with siblings as sacred spouses, everything else follows naturally. Of course, the Greeks loved to exaggerate. They painted Persians as lustful, perverse, wallowing in scandalous unions. It's possible that what was rare among Persians became, in Greek gossip, universal. After all, nothing discredits an enemy faster than accusing them of sleeping with their sisters. Yet Persian texts themselves, hymns and law codes, clearly endorse Widoda. Whether practiced widely or just admired, it was undeniably praised. You picture the awkwardness this must have caused at diplomatic banquets. A Greek envoy, polite smile fixed, listening as Persians toast to the holiness of kin marriage. He raises his cup, choking slightly, whispering later in his diary, "Dear Athens, remind me never to let my sister visit Persia." You can almost hear the sarcasm dripping through centuries, and yet when you set aside your discomfort, you notice something. Persians weren't ashamed. There was no whisper, no secrecy. It was open, celebrated, ritualized. That confidence itself is jarring. In your own world, taboo hides in shadows, whispered at midnight. In theirs, it paraded down palace halls with garlands and song. The harem politics tie back in. Behind the lattice screens, royal women wielded immense influence. Sisters and daughters elevated to wives didn't just bring scandal. They brought power. As consorts, they secured sons who were doubly royal, bloodlines wrapped tight. Those sons carried legitimacy beyond question. Outsiders could scream incest. Insiders proclaimed divine blessing. What did it feel like for those women? Some might have seen honour, others despair. Some might have relished power, others dreaded obligation. Their voices are largely lost, drowned under the chants of priests and the scribbles of Greek men. Yet you can imagine the silence of a bride walking through palace corridors, veiled, knowing her husband was her brother. Did she feel holy or trapped? Both, perhaps. And what of children? Were they considered tainted? Quite the opposite. Close kin offspring were celebrated, seen as pure, blessed, even destined for greatness. In royal courts, such children carried an aura of inevitability. They weren't whispered about as inbred. They were declared heirs by divine right. Again, a complete reversal of your instincts. The practice lasted for centuries. Even into later eras, echoes of Zwidoda lingered in law codes. Priests kept praising it, long after Greek and Roman sneers circulated. Eventually, under new empires and shifting religions, the practice faded, condemned as scandalous. But for that long Persian moment, it was not only tolerated, but revered. You sit in the garden trying to digest it. A union you recoil from was to them cosmic virtue. A scandal in your eyes was, in theirs, salvation. Once again, you realize how history flips perspective like a coin. What feels shocking to you was the holiest act to them, and as night settles, the palace walls glow golden under torchlight, while inside family feasts and family unions blur together. To Persians, this is order, purity, alignment with the first humans. To you, it's a paradox, both fascinating and unsettling, another shock, in the long list of what once was normal. The evening deepens, torches licking shadows across carved columns, and once again you are ushered deeper into the palace. You have seen vultures and ashes, urine jars and nail clippings, fiery ordeals and scandalous unions, and you think nothing could surprise you more. But then you enter the grand hall where the King of Kings holds court, and you realize Persia's strangeness isn't only in its rituals of death and marriage. It is in the sheer theatre of power, in how subjects approach their ruler as if he were not quite human at all. The hall rises like a cavern of stone and gold. Reliefs line the walls, processions of tribute-bearers carved in rows, Persians in long robes, Elamites, Egyptians, Indians, all carrying gifts. Gold glitters on every surface, torches mirrored in polished tiles, and at the far end, upon a platform so high you half expect him to touch the ceiling, sits the great king. Not merely a monarch, but a cosmic pivot, the one chosen by Ahura Mazda to guard order against chaos. A noble enters to present tribute. He does not bow politely. He does not incline his head as you might before a modern dignitary. Instead, he throws himself flat to the floor, arms stretched out, forehead pressed into the stone. This is proskinesis, full-body prostration, the only fitting way to greet a ruler whose very presence radiates divinity. You watch as man after man collapses before the throne like waves breaking on a shore. Even generals, even wealthy satraps, men who govern provinces the size of kingdoms, all fall down, bodies pressed like rugs underfoot. The message is clear. Here in Persia, the king is not simply first among equals. He is the cosmic axis, and you are dust. The rule is strict. No one addresses the king casually. No one meets his eyes unless permitted. To do so is not boldness. It is blasphemy. Even nobles approach with eyes lowered, voices trembling. If the king so much as raises a finger, servants rush forward. If he frowns, silence descends. His moods ripple outward like thunderclouds across an empire. Imagine living in a world where your entire fate hinges on whether the man on the throne thinks your robe is wrinkled. And yet, despite the fear, there is awe. For Persians, this was not humiliation, but honour. To flatten yourself before the king was to acknowledge the cosmic order itself. He was the representative of Ahura Mazda, the divine keeper of Asher. By bowing to him, you bowed to the principle of truth, light, and order. To them, it was not debasement, but participation in the sacred. Of course, outsiders balked. Greeks in particular seethed at the sight. To them, only gods deserved such prostration. When Alexander later conquered Persia, his attempt to adopt proskinesis enraged his Macedonian companions. "We bow to no man," they cried, "not even you." But here, centuries earlier, Persians knelt happily, even eagerly. What shocked the Greeks was simply the etiquette of empire. You glance again at the throne. The king's robe glitters, embroidered with animals, lions lunging, bulls charging, eagles poised. His beard is curled meticulously. His crown rises like a miniature ziggurat. Around him stand immortals. The king's guard, their spears tipped in silver, their robes patterned. Behind him, scribes with tablets, eunuchs with fans, attendants with towels. He is never alone, never unguarded, never anything less than spectacle. But here's the subtlety. Not even the immortals look him in the eye. They too stand slightly bowed, their gaze fixed on the floor or horizon. You realize that even those who could kill for him, even those closest to his person, are trained never to forget. He is untouchable. He is not friend, not companion, but cosmic flame given flesh. The rituals reinforce it. When meals are served, the king eats first. Others wait, trembling until permitted. When he drinks, toasts echo his name. When he speaks, scribes record every syllable, as though his casual remark about the weather were worth chiselling in stone. In an empire where lying was cosmic corruption, the king's word carried peculiar weight. Truth, because he said it. If he declared the sky purple, priests could find a hymn to support it. You wonder about the loneliness of such grandeur. Did kings ever long for someone to meet their gaze without trembling? Did they ever crave the comfort of conversation without ritual? Perhaps. But the system allowed no cracks. To drop the mask was to risk unravelling the illusion of divinity. And so the king lived in endless theatre, applauded and feared, never touched without permission, never spoken to without rehearsed words. And it wasn't just nobles and courtiers. Ordinary subjects too, when allowed before him, prostrated fully. Imagine a farmer from Bactria, dusty from weeks of travel, carrying a basket of melons to present. He enters the hall, heart pounding, sees the glittering throne, and immediately collapses flat, face pressed into the floor until summoned to rise. He mutters prayers, not only that his melons will be accepted, but that his posture pleases the king. One wrong move, one clumsy gesture, and punishment might follow. Punishment for failing to prostrate wasn't minor. Accounts tell of nobles executed for insufficient reverence. To refuse was treason, not rudeness. You weren't insulting the man, you were defying the cosmic order, and in Persia, cosmic rebels met brutal ends. Better to risk backache from endless bowing than to risk a missing head. But the Persians didn't see it as grovelling. They saw it as alignment. Just as rivers demanded reverence, just as fire demanded purity, so too the king demanded absolute submission. Not for his ego, though it surely helped, but for the universe itself. The empire was vast, stretching from India to Greece, from deserts to mountains. To hold it together required more than swords. It required ritual, awe, the theatre of divinity embodied in one man. It worked. Tribes who would never bow to one another all bowed to the king. Egyptians, Babylonians, Medes, Lydians, all prostrated alike. The ritual erased divisions. It proclaimed one cosmic order under one throne. Even if resentment festered, the act of bowing trained obedience. It was propaganda, ritual, and control woven into one simple gesture: fall down. And then, of course, there were the banquets. If prostration was the formal ritual, feasting was its festive cousin. Imagine the hall transformed. Long tables grown under mountains of roasted meat, spiced rice, sweet fruits. Wine flows endlessly. But even here the hierarchy holds. Guests toast the king with every cup, chanting his titles, praising his victories. Musicians play, dancers whirl, and yet all eyes flick nervously toward the throne. If he smiles, the room erupts in laughter. If he frowns, silence drops like a curtain. Even joy must be rehearsed. You sip diluted wine, careful not to spill. A guest beside you whispers, "Do not raise your head too quickly when you drink. It can be seen as arrogance." You nod, throat tight, realizing even swallowing must be performed correctly in this theatre of power. Outsiders again balked. Greeks muttered that Persians enslaved themselves voluntarily, turning kings into gods. But Persians shrugged. To them, freedom was chaos. Order was kneeling. You cannot help but think of your own world, where celebrities are worshipped with near-religious fervour. Perhaps Persia was less alien than you think. Swap out torches for paparazzi, and maybe not much has changed. As the feast wanes, the king retires behind a curtain, leaving courtiers still prostrate long after his departure. Slowly, cautiously, they rise, rubbing stiff necks, whispering about his mood. You realise they will analyse every gesture, every flicker of expression for days. Did he smile long enough? Did he seem displeased? Did he drink less than usual? In a world where the king embodied cosmic balance, his digestion might be considered an omen. You leave the hall shaken, half in awe, half in disbelief. To live in such a system meant carrying constant awareness of posture, words, eyes. It meant reshaping your body into ritual, flattening yourself not just before a man but before the universe itself. And so, yet again, you face the paradox. What shocks you as humiliation was, to Persians, holy reverence. What you see as excessive flattery was, to them, survival and salvation. Another piece of their normal that bends your mind, another strange mirror in which your own assumptions stare back. The echo of sandals slapping stone fades as you step away from the throne hall, but you hardly have time to catch your breath before another rhythm calls you. The clink of cups, the murmur of laughter, the thrum of flutes. If prostration was the ritual of power, feasting was the ritual of belonging. And in Persia, feasting didn't mean a polite evening meal. It meant multi-day marathons of food and most of all wine. You push open the doors of a banquet chamber, and the first thing that hits you is the smell. Roasted lamb rubbed in coriander, honey dripping from figs, saffron rice steaming in golden heaps. Then comes the sight. Tables stretching farther than your eyes can follow, groaning under trays of dates, nuts, cheeses, fish, bread stacked high like miniature ziggurats. But towering above it all like a god among mortals are the jars of wine. Huge clay amphorae, their sides stained from years of pouring, stand ready to fuel the night. Persians adored their wine, but they had rules. They almost always drank it diluted with water. Straight wine, they believed, was barbaric, a step too close to chaos. Dilution kept order, extended the night, and allowed feasts to last for days. Picture a guest raising his cup. Half water, half wine, all ritual. A toast to the king, a toast to the gods, a toast to truth itself. By the 10th round, you'd think people would collapse. Instead, they kept going. The rules requiring each guest to match the others, cup for cup. Yes, compulsory drinking. If one person drank, all had to drink. If someone toasted, the entire room lifted their cups. Imagine your office holiday party with the rule that every sip of eggnog had to be mimicked by everyone else. Now extend that across 3 days, swap eggnog for ancient Shiraz wine, and you get a sense of Persian banqueting. The music never stopped. Lutes hummed, flutes shrilled, drums thudded, dancers swirled with veils catching torchlight, storytellers recited epics of heroes and kings. The feast was both carnival and classroom, entertainment and instruction. You weren't just drinking. You were participating in a ritual that declared, "We are one. We are strong. We are ordered." Wine was not merely alcohol, it was glue, bonding a vast empire in shared intoxication. Of course things got messy. Outsiders mocked Persians as drunkards. Herodotus claimed decisions were made twice, once while drunk, once while sober, to see if they matched. Imagine your city council meeting with wine flowing, then reconvening the next day hungover to confirm whether banning goats from sidewalks was still a good idea. Ridiculous? Yes, but strangely efficient. If both drunk you and sober you agreed, maybe the policy had merit. Guests came from every corner of the empire. Egyptians with honeyed beer, Indians with spices, Greeks with olive oil. They brought tribute, but they also brought their thirst. Banquets became cultural exchanges. Imagine the chatter. In my country, we drink unmixed. In mine, we chew betel nut. Here in Persia, friend, we dilute. Now drink, or insult the king. Refusing wasn't an option. You might as well slap the throne and declare war. And oh, the scale. Some accounts describe banquets, feeding tens of thousands. Cooks worked in shifts, soldiers carried trays, servants poured endlessly. The logistics was staggering. Wine jars arriving by caravan, spices hauled from India, lambs slaughtered by the hundreds. If today's music festivals run on energy drinks, Persia's festivals ran on wine, measured not in cups but in rivers. You sit at the table, cup trembling in your hand. The man beside you, a noble from Susa, grins and raises his. "To the King of Kings!" everyone echoes, and you scramble to keep up. Another toast follows, then another, then another. Soon you've lost count. Each round seems to blur into the next. You're woozy, but the noble grins wider. "Now," he slurs, "we talk politics." And so begins the famous Persian habit of discussing state affairs mid-banquet. You'd think wine would ruin judgment. Maybe it did, but Persians valued the loosened tongue. Secrets spilled, true feelings revealed. A man's sincerity shone when drunk, his caution stripped away. It was risky. One wrong word could end careers, yet it was also trusted. The Persians saw drunken honesty as a kind of truth serum. They relied on it, then confirmed sober. Imagine modern parliaments testing laws the same way. Tequila shots first, debate later. Not that everyone enjoyed the rule. Somewhere in the feast you glimpse a man swaying, face pale, desperately pretending to sip while hiding his cup. But attendants watched carefully, making sure cups emptied, refills poured. To decline was insult, to fail was humiliation. Guests staggered out after days of this, some carried, some vomiting in courtyards, some still singing hymns to fire. And yet no one questioned the ritual. It was Persia's way of binding bodies and souls to throne and cosmos alike. The Greeks, again, sneered. They painted Persians as decadent, weak, drunk. Yet the irony is sharp. Greeks themselves loved wine, their symposiums famous for debate and intoxication. The difference? Greeks prided themselves on moderation, Persians on unity. For Greeks, wine was a tool for philosophy. For Persians, it was a tool for loyalty. Two cultures, same drink, opposite interpretations. Beyond politics, banquets shaped social life. Weddings, victories, festivals, all centered on food and wine. Even funerals included feasts, though priests carefully separated eating from corpses. Wine celebrated births, mourned deaths, sealed alliances, even marked purification after ordeal. To drink together was to share fate. To drink alone was suspicious. And then there's the humour. Imagine slurred toasts growing sillier with each round. "To the goats!" someone yells, and suddenly the entire court raises cups to goats. A dancer trips, the hall erupts in laughter. A noble insists he can balance his cup on his head. It spills down his robe, staining silk. To Persians, these moments weren't shameful. They were communal, binding through shared embarrassment. Everyone left the feast with stories, laughter, and aching heads. Still, beneath the revelry lurked risk. Too much honesty could doom you. One noble's careless, drunk complaint about a tax collector might reach the king's ears. Another man's boast about forbidden love could become scandal. Banquets were both glue and trap. They bonded and exposed, lifted and ruined. A guest had to tread carefully, or rather drink carefully. And you, swaying at the table, realize the paradox again. To you, the compulsion feels oppressive, even dangerous. To them it was joy, duty, ritual. To outsiders, Persians seemed enslaved by their wine. To Persians, they were united by it. The feast stretches on, torches burning low, music winding toward frenzy. A storyteller recites the epic of Rostam, voice booming over the clatter. The crowd roars approval, cups lifted once more. You feel your own voice rising, shouting along, though the words blur. For a moment, you belong. For a moment, you're not shocked but swept up, another soul bound to the empire by wine and ritual. When at last dawn creeps in, bodies litter the hall. Some sleep on rugs, some slump against columns, some still mumble half-finished toasts. Servants step quietly, collecting cups, refilling amphorae for the next round. Because in Persia, feast did not end with sunrise. They rolled on, day after day, until the king or priest declared enough. You stumble out into daylight, head spinning, realizing once again, what shocks you now was their way of life, binding empire in cups of diluted wine. The daylight burns white across the palace courtyard, but behind latticed walls another world stirs, a world of hushed whispers, rustling silk and shadows that never step into the open. You leave behind the noise of feasts and the clatter of soldiers' boots to approach the royal harem. The word itself already carries weight in your mind, conjuring pictures from later centuries, exaggerated tales of decadence or forbidden pleasure. But here, in ancient Persia, the harem wasn't just an enclave of secluded women, it was the nerve centre of dynastic politics, a place where gossip could outweigh armies, where veiled faces held more power than the swords of generals. You pass through a narrow archway, guarded by eunuchs, men altered in body so they could never pose a sexual threat, but trusted as gatekeepers of this hidden empire. Their eyes, sharp as daggers, follow every move. Within lies the labyrinth of the royal women, wives, concubines, daughters and servants numbering in the hundreds. Some were Persian noblewomen, others captives from far-flung provinces, others bought, gifted or raised from childhood. Together they lived in a gilded cage of endless chambers, gardens and courtyards, unseen by the outside world. The rules are strict. No man enters except the king, his sons, and the eunuchs who serve. Even high officials who command armies cannot breach these walls, and yet, though locked away, the women are anything but powerless. Here in the harem, alliances form over whispered conversations, rivalries simmer beneath painted smiles, and decisions ripple outward to shape the empire itself. You realize quickly, this is no idle boudoir. This is a parliament in silk. Picture the great king's chief wife seated on a cushioned throne of her own. She oversees the household, commands servants, arranges marriages, and most importantly, manages the harem's politics. The other women watch her carefully, some seeking her favour, others scheming to replace her. A simple gift of jewels or a whispered slander can tilt the balance. When she speaks, her words reach the king's ear through pillow talk, and from there they may become law. Concubines, too, wielded power. Though technically lesser than wives, they could rise swiftly if the king favoured them. A concubine who bore a son might suddenly eclipse noble-born rivals. The birth of an heir wasn't just personal triumph, it was a political earthquake. You can almost hear the tense silence of the harem when a servant announces, "The concubine from Bactria is with child." Smiles mask envy, gifts mask daggers, and alliances shuffle overnight. Outsiders imagined harems as dens of luxury, women lounging endlessly on couches, fanned by servants, fed with grapes. The truth was far more complicated. For many women, life here was claustrophobic, bound by ritual, surveillance, and competition. Every step was watched, every word weighed. Their beauty was currency, their fertility a weapon, their wit a survival tool sharper than steel. Some thrived, weaving influence with grace. Others faltered, fading into obscurity, pawns sacrificed in silent wars. And yet, the harem was not simply prison. It was also education. Girls raised here learned arts, languages, diplomacy, music. They were trained in etiquette, in persuasion, in subtle manipulation. A harem girl might never set foot outside the palace walls, but she could pull strings that reached across provinces. When satraps bowed in distant capitals, they sometimes did so because of whispers seeded here, behind curtains. Think of the eunuchs again. They were not merely guards, but go-betweens, carrying messages, gifts, even bribes. Their loyalty was precious, their betrayal deadly. A eunuch who favoured one woman could tilt the balance of harem politics. Imagine the whispered bargains. Bring my words to the king, and I will see your nephew promoted. Every relationship was a chess piece, every errand boy a potential kingmaker, and the rivalries could turn lethal. Historical accounts whisper of poisonings, of women vanishing overnight, of sudden illnesses that conveniently removed competitors. The harem was as dangerous as any battlefield, only the weapons were subtler. Honeyed wine spiced just a bit too heavily. A bracelet laced with toxins. A rumour seeded until it bloomed into royal suspicion, all hidden beneath veils and perfume. Yet, amid intrigue, there was intimacy. Sisters comforted one another. Mothers nursed children. Friendships formed. In courtyards shaded with vines, women gossiped, laughed, sang songs of home. Some played board games, others embroidered silks, others prayed before sacred fires tended within. Daily life was both ordinary and extraordinary, a rhythm of confinement laced with moments of tenderness and menace alike. For the king, the harem was not simply pleasure but insurance. With wives and concubines drawn from across the empire, he bound distant peoples to his dynasty. A Babylonian concubine meant Babylon's loyalty. A Median wife meant Median support. Every woman carried not only beauty but politics in her veins. To marry her was to marry her province. To slight her was to insult her people. Imagine negotiating with an empire through pillow talk. The Greeks, as always, turned these harems into scandal in their writings. To them, Persians drowned in decadence, ruled not by kings but by scheming women. Some stories dripped with exotic fantasy, painting harems as orgiastic dens of lust. Others portrayed them as sinister, filled with manipulative wives pulling strings. Perhaps truth lived somewhere in between, not endless debauchery, not pure innocence, but a complex web of influence and survival. You imagine a night in the harem. The king strolls in, perfumed and robed, while dozens of women glance up, hearts pounding. Some hope for his gaze, some dread it, some pretend indifference. He chooses one chamber, one companion. The rest retreat, plotting tomorrow's moves. In a world where fate hinged on proximity to the king, every glance was a gamble, and children, oh, the children. Princes and princesses grew up here, watched over by mothers, tutors, eunuchs. The harem was their nursery, their school, their playground. They absorbed the politics early, learning to sense shifts in tone, to play factions even as children. A boy who watched his mother rise or fall understood quickly how fragile favour could be. By the time he left the harem for court, he was already a seasoned politician in miniature. But not all women's lives remained confined. Some harem women rose to astounding power, stepping beyond the walls to act as regents or advisors. Queens like Atossa, daughter of Cyrus and wife of Darius, wielded immense influence, shaping succession itself. In her shadow, even generals quailed. She was proof that a harem woman could dominate not only silken chambers but the empire's destiny. Still, for many the harem was a gilded cage. Imagine the ache of never seeing the world beyond the palace walls, of hearing tales of far-off provinces but never walking their streets. Imagine longing for freedom while surrounded by luxury. A fountain may sparkle, but it cannot flow beyond its basin. And yet, despite confinement, the harem endured as a pillar of empire. It produced heirs, secured alliances, channeled influence. It was both sanctuary and battlefield, both prison and palace. To you, its rules seemed suffocating, its politics cruel. To Persians, it was simply the way power worked, hidden, veiled, whispered. As you step back through the archway, leaving behind the murmurs of silk and perfume, you realize once again how inverted everything feels. What shocks you as oppression, secrecy, scheming was to them a vital engine of empire. In Persia, women behind walls could shake the world outside them, and that, perhaps, is the strangest paradox yet. The most secluded voices were often the most powerful. The air beyond the harem feels starkly different, freer, lighter, And yet you're not finished with Persia's strange normalities. From whispering vales and perfumed chambers, you now walk into something that at first seems far simpler, a walled garden. At first glance, it looks like paradise itself, and in fact, that's precisely what the Persians intended. But here's the shock. The very word paradise comes from these gardens. Paradisa, meaning enclosure. What you see here is not merely horticulture. It is theology painted in flowers and stone. You step through an arched gate and the noise of the city falls away instantly. Inside is order. Paths run in perfect grids, dividing lawns into quadrants. Water flows through carved channels, streaming from fountains that sparkle under the sun. Rows of cypress trees rise tall and slender, flanking beds of roses, violets, lilies. Fruit trees lean heavy with figs, pomegranates, and apples. Birds flit between branches, their songs mixing with the quiet splash of water. It feels like the world has exhaled. But don't be fooled. This tranquility was engineered. These gardens were not natural in the modern sense. They were deliberate microcosms of the universe. The Persians, hemmed by deserts and mountains, understood chaos intimately. So when they carved a rectangle of order, filled it with green, and irrigated it with hidden channels, they weren't just making something pretty. They were demonstrating mastery over chaos, proving that human hands, guided by divine law, could tame even the harshest earth. The water, drawn by underground qanats from distant aquifers, was lifeblood. Persians treated it like flowing veins of the goddess herself channeled into balance. Streams were divided carefully, each quadrant receiving equal share. Inequality of water wasn't just impractical, it was unholy. A gardener who blocked a channel selfishly might be punished as though he had blasphemed. To you, irrigation is plumbing. To them, it was liturgy. Imagine standing in a garden at Persepolis. Darius himself might walk these paths, robe trailing, attendants carrying fans. Foreign ambassadors, eyes wide, would be led here deliberately. The message was subtle but clear. See what we have made. We control chaos. We bring order where desert reigns. No, need to boast when roses did the speaking. A Greek envoy might mutter, "Pretty flowers," but he left knowing he had just seen empire distilled in green and stone. The symbolism ran deep. Trees represented eternal life, fountains the source of creation, paths the four corners of the world. Even the shape mattered. The rectangular enclosure mirrored cosmic order. Walking inside was like walking through a map of the universe, a sacred geometry made visible. You could almost hear priests chanting as gardeners trimmed shrubs, though in truth priests rarely dirtied their hands. That duty fell to gardeners, whose work was half labour, half devotion. And the luxury. Guests reclined on carpets under shade pavilions, sipping wine while breezes rustled through leaves. Musicians played quietly, servants brought trays of dates and melons. The scent of roses mixed with saffron and grilled meats. These weren't gardens for weeding, they were stages for leisure, diplomacy and display. If you were invited here, it meant you had entered the empire's inner harmony. If you were excluded, you remained in chaos outside the walls. The Persians even exported the idea. When later kings built estates across conquered lands, they carried the garden with them. Paradisa became a symbol of Persian civilization itself, a portable paradise, proving order could bloom anywhere. Centuries later, when Greeks translated the word into paradisos and Christians adopted it into paradise, the meaning stuck. Every time you say paradise, you're echoing the footsteps of Persian kings strolling under pomegranates. But here's the shock. These gardens weren't merely aristocratic indulgence, they were sacred spaces. Some were attached to fire temples, where priests used flowing water for purification. Others were dedicated to specific deities. Sacrifices were made in them, oaths sworn, rituals enacted. A marriage blessed inside a garden wasn't just pretty scenery, it was cosmic affirmation. To Persians, greenery was theology, water was divinity, shade was salvation. And yet you also sense the darker side. Because gardens symbolized order, they excluded the messy realities of ordinary life. Peasants sweating in fields weren't strolling shaded paths. Villagers struggling to find water didn't sip from marble fountains. These walled paradises were elite privileges, glimpses of heaven fenced off from most. For the majority, paradise was something seen from a distance, never entered. The empire's order was, like the garden walls, selective. Still, the cultural power was immense. Poets sang of these gardens as metaphors for love and eternity. Kings used them as propaganda, planting exotic trees brought from conquered lands. Imagine walking in a garden in Susa and seeing trees from India beside vines from Egypt. It was a living map of conquest, each root declaring, "The world blooms under Persia." The king didn't need to parade. His army, when his orchards, paraded it silently. The Greeks predictably rolled their eyes. They mocked Persians for indulgence, for hiding in shady retreats instead of training in the sun. To a Spartan, gardens symbolized softness. To a Persian, they symbolized cosmic victory. Again, two worlds clashed, one prizing toughness in dust, the other prizing harmony in shade. Which was right? Perhaps both, perhaps neither. But Persians built gardens that outlived empires, while Spartan training grounds are long dust. And the imagery lingered. Centuries later, Islamic architects would inherit Persian gardens, weaving them into courtyards of mosques and palaces. The fourfold design echoed in Mughal India, in Andalusian Spain, in every tiled courtyard with fountains at its centre. Even today, when you walk through a landscape park with symmetrical paths and water channels, you are strolling through Persian philosophy without realising it. You pause at a fountain, water arcs in sunlight scattering rainbow flecks, birds splash, wings flicking droplets onto the stones. The sound is soft, steady, like breath. You realise why Persians treasured this. In a land of heat and dust, a garden was not just beauty. It was survival. It was sanity. It was the proof that order could be coaxed from chaos, that heaven could be previewed on earth. And so you sit beneath a cypress tree, hearing flutes drift across the lawn, feeling shade cool your skin. To you, it feels like luxury. To them, it was religion, politics, propaganda, and pleasure all in one. Another Persian normal that feels shocking in its seriousness, yet alluring in its beauty. Another reminder that even roses can carry theology in their petals. The garden's coolness fades as you step back into the city streets. Dust rises under sandals, merchants shout, children weave between donkeys, and suddenly you're thrust into another kind of order. Not the harmony of roses and fountains, but the iron discipline of law and punishment. If paradise was built with symmetry, justice was enforced with pain. And the punishments of Persia were as strange, severe, and inventive as any corner of the empire. You first notice it in the marketplace. A man is dragged forward, hands bound, accused of theft. Instead of a trial with molten brass, this case is simpler. The magistrate doesn't debate. He signals, and soldiers seize the thief, slicing off his ears with a sharp knife. Blood spatters onto the dust, but the crowd barely flinches. To them, it's normal. Lose your ears, lose your honour. The man staggers, shrieking, marked forever as criminal. No need for long trials when everyone can now see his guilt etched on his face. Other punishments were equally brutal and creative. Nose cutting, tongue slitting, branding the forehead with hot irons. The idea wasn't simply retribution but permanent humiliation, a living warning to others. Imagine walking through Persepolis and seeing men with half faces, women with scarred lips, bodies stamped with law itself. It must have felt like strolling past a grim gallery of cautionary tales. And then there were the executions. Some were swift, a sword, a spear, a hanging. But others were slow, theatrical, almost ritualistic. One infamous method was entombing alive between walls. A traitor might be wedged in a narrow gap, bricks stacked around until only a face protruded. Left to starve, he became both warning and spectacle. Picture yourself walking by, catching sight of eyes glaring out of stone. To Persians, it was justice. To you, it's nightmare fuel. Another was flaying. Yes, flaying. The skin stripped from a traitor's body, then stretched across city gates or the judge's chair. A grotesque banner declaring, "This is what happens when you betray order." Imagine approaching a courtroom and seeing the seat of judgment literally upholstered in human skin. Subtle? Not at all. Effective? Probably. And yet the Persians didn't see cruelty as pointless. These punishments, though horrifying, carried symbolism. Cutting ears symbolized silencing lies. Cutting noses symbolized severing arrogance. Entombing between walls symbolized excluding chaos from society. To them, each penalty restored balance in the cosmic war of truth versus filth. Pain was not random but meaningful, as though even mutilation could be theology. You wander further and hear whispers of perhaps the most infamous punishment of all, the boats, or scaphism, recorded by later sources. Imagine two hollowed logs joined together like a coffin, with the victim trapped inside, head, hands, and feet protruding. He was force-fed milk and honey until sickness overwhelmed him, then smeared with more honey to attract insects. Floated on a stagnant pond, he baked under the sun while flies, wasps, and maggots feasted for days. Some accounts claim victims survived for over a week, tormented by bites, stings, and rot. To you, it sounds like horror fiction. To Persians, it was extreme justice for extreme crimes: betrayal, regicide, treason. If mutilations taught lessons, scaphism was theatre of terror. Outsiders recoiled, scribbling with disgust. Greeks painted Persians as sadists, obsessed with pain. Yet Persians framed these punishments as necessary to protect cosmic order. Better one traitor rot in a pond than the empire itself collapse. Brutality wasn't entertainment, at least officially. It was preservation. Still, one suspects some spectators leaned in a bit too eagerly, just as modern crowds slow down at accidents. Not all penalties dripped blood. Some were fines, livestock, grain, service. But even fines were often accompanied by lashings. Lashes came in terrifyingly specific numbers: 50, 100, 300. Each stroke was counted, each blow a reminder of cosmic consequence. A farmer who polluted water might be lashed with rods until his back split, then fined oxenont. Top justice was both sting and scarcity, pain and poverty combined. You wonder how ordinary Persians coped. Did fear of punishment breed obedience, or resentment? Likely both. A thief might hesitate, glancing at his neighbour's mutilated ears, but another might seethe, vowing revenge. The empire gambled that terror outweighed rebellion. Judging by its longevity, perhaps it did. And then there was public spectacle. Punishments weren't hidden. They were performed in markets, squares, at city gates. Justice was theatre, teaching crowds through fear. Children watched ears fall, merchants saw whips crack. Travellers carried tales of flayed skins back to villages. In a society where writing was limited, punishment itself was propaganda. Why hang posters when you can hang bodies? Still, you can't help but think of the contradictions. This same empire built paradise gardens, engineered qanats, praised truth, and sang hymns to light. And yet, it also cut noses, flayed men, and floated traitors in honey. The paradox is staggering. How could roses and scaphism coexist? How could paradise and mutilation belong to the same world? Perhaps that's the secret of Persia. Extremes woven together, beauty and brutality, order and terror, all justified under the banner of cosmic balance. You overhear a soldier joking grimly. Better lose your nose than your skin. Another laughs, nodding toward a man missing both ears. At least he doesn't have to hear us. Gallows humour flourished, just as it does in modern prisons or barracks. Even horror becomes bearable when wrapped in laughter. And yet, for victims, there was no humour. Imagine sitting bound, hearing your sentence, realising your body would become a billboard of guilt. Imagine watching the crowd's eyes shift from pity to disgust as the knife sliced. In those moments, Persian justice must have felt like divine wrath descending. Unstoppable. Absolute. You step back, shaken. Another Persian normal that rattles you. To them it was necessity. To you it is cruelty. But again, perspective shifts. In a vast empire where rebellion lurked and chaos threatened, perhaps fear was the only glue strong enough to hold it. Paradise was walled with roses, but also with ears and skin. The empire glittered, but its glitter was edged with blood. You stagger away from the marketplace, still haunted by the sight of ears lying in dust and whispers of men sealed into walls. You think Persia cannot possibly have more shocks to offer. But then, as twilight deepens and shepherds drive their animals back from the fields, you begin to notice another strangeness. This time not in how Persians treated humans, but in how they treated animals. Dogs snarl at the edges of the street, frogs leap near irrigation ditches, and suddenly every creature seems to carry moral weight. In ancient Persia, animals weren't just beasts. Some were sacred guardians, others were demonic intruders, and the punishments for harming or protecting them were as severe as any human law. Take the dog. Not merely man's best friend, but in Zoroastrian lore, a holy protector of order. The Avesta, their sacred scripture, sang of dogs as divine allies who guarded homes and herds, fought demons, and even guided souls after death. A good dog wasn't simply a pet. It was cosmic soldier. To strike a dog was unthinkable. To kill one was a crime punishable by lashes, not a handful, but hundreds. Some texts describe 300 blows for killing a shepherd's dog. A person could survive mutilation, but woe to him who harmed a hound. Picture it, a farmer's mastiff barking at intruders. A thief throws a stone, breaking its leg. Word spreads. The man is dragged before a magistrate. He isn't scolded with "be nice to animals." He is whipped until his back is ribbons, fined grain, and cursed by priests. The logic was simple. By wounding a dog, he had sided with demons. Dogs were not accessories. They were part of the sacred defense grid. Even funerals involved dogs. Corpses were laid out before towers of silence, and dogs, four-eyed dogs, with markings above their eyes, were led to gaze upon them. This ritual, called Sagdid, dog's glance, was believed to drive away the corpse demon Nasu. A dog's eyes could repel evil where human eyes failed. Imagine your funeral director today solemnly leading a beagle around the coffin before prayers. To Persians, this was no joke. It was cosmic pest control. On the other side of the spectrum lurked creatures condemned as agents of chaos. Frogs, ants, snakes, and especially noxious little vermin like ants or lizards were considered spawn of Ahriman, the evil spirit. Killing them wasn't just pest control, it was holy warfare. Priests urged people to crush, drown, or stone them whenever possible. Each slain frog was a small victory in the cosmic war. To modern ears it sounds like overkill. To Persians, every squashed vermin tipped the scale toward order. But the laws could be bewildering. Killing a snake was holy. Killing a water dog, like an otter, was sinful. Cats slithered between both camps, sometimes tolerated, sometimes condemned as demonic. Imagine the anxiety of seeing a lizard crawl into your pantry. Do you kill it to earn merit or risk lashes for harming the wrong species? Persian life was basically one long game of which animal is sacred, with cosmic consequences attached. And the penalties. Killing the wrong animal could ruin you. One law prescribes 200 lashes for killing a beaver. Another demanded a year of penance for harming a water dog. Meanwhile, not killing vermin when you had the chance could also be a crime. You picture a harried villager explaining, "I swear, priest, the frog hopped too fast," and the priest frowning, "Ignorance of the frog is no excuse." Outsiders again found it absurd. Greeks sneered that Persians lavished devotion on dogs, while hating frogs. To them, dogs were useful but hardly sacred, and vermin were simply vermin. They couldn't fathom why Persians legislated animal behaviour with such passion. But once again, the Persian logic rested on Zoroastrian dualism. Every creature was aligned with either Asher, order, or Druj, chaos. Protect the allies, annihilate the enemies. There was no neutral ground. Even your backyard critters were soldiers in the eternal war. This obsession shaped daily life. Farmers were expected to care for dogs with food and shelter. Travellers were urged to keep them as companions against wolves. Priests preached the merits of feeding stray dogs. Meanwhile, children were scolded if they spared a frog or ant. To leave vermin alive was to leave chaos alive. Imagine bedtime prayers ending with, "Bless mother, bless father, and curse all frogs." And dogs weren't just guardians in life. They were guardians in myth. In Zoroastrian eschatology, when souls crossed the Chinvat bridge after death, dogs appeared to guide the righteous safely across, snarling at demons waiting below. A dog's loyalty extended beyond life itself. Little wonder they were sacred. To harm one was almost like betraying your guardian angel. The paradox grows clearer. Here was an empire that mutilated thieves, married siblings, purified with bull urine, and yet passed laws to ensure puppies were fed. Brutality and compassion braided together. A man might lose his ears for stealing, but his neighbour could be flogged for neglecting a dog. In Persia, the sacred and the savage were always entwined. You sit in the twilight watching a shepherd's dog trot proudly beside his flock. Children toss scraps to strays near the fire temple, laughing. Then a boy hurls a stone at a frog by the well, cheered by priests. To you it feels bizarre. Tenderness for some creatures, mercilessness for others. But to Persians it was consistency. Every act, feeding a hound, smashing a toad, was part of the same cosmic battle. And once again, what shocks you is their certainty. No hesitation, no doubt. For them, it was clear. Protect the sacred. Destroy the demonic. To you, it's unsettling. To them, it was survival. And so you watch the dog curl beside the fire, eyes glinting in torchlight, and you realize, in ancient Persia, even the animals bore the weight of eternity. The twilight deepens, and with it a hush settles across the empire's memory. You've walked through towers filled with bones, seen priests pouring sacred urine, watched men plunge their hands into molten brass, heard weddings sung between brother and sister, bowed in torchlit halls where kings shimmered like gods, reeled through banquets that lasted until dawn, slipped past veils in harems thick with whispers, strolled through gardens of paradise, and flinched at mutilations and flayings in dusty squares. You've even learned that in Persia, a dog's gaze could banish demons, while a frog's croak could be treachery. And now, the journey draws to a close. The streets are quieter now. Merchants shutter stalls, the last smoke of cooking fires drifts upward, and the hum of the city fades into crickets and distant dogs barking at shadows. You walk slowly, shoulders heavy, not with fear but with the sheer weight of what you've seen. Each detail presses into you. The strange logic of purity, the relentless rituals, the paradoxes of tenderness and brutality. And you realize something. For the Persians, none of this was strange. Towers of silence weren't grotesque. They were necessary. Kin marriage wasn't scandal. It was sacred. Flaying wasn't cruelty. It was cleansing. Gardens weren't indulgence. They were cosmic models. Theirs was a world where every gesture, every clipping of hair, every sip of diluted wine mattered. A world where chaos was always pressing in, and every ritual, however odd, was a defense against it. What shocks you now was once as ordinary as breathing. You sit by a courtyard pool, moonlight glitters on the water's surface, trembling softly as if the goddess Apa herself is listening. A priest passes by, murmuring prayers. Somewhere above, a vulture wheels silently, searching for its next duty atop a tower. Life and death, purity and filth, order and chaos, all flowing in endless circles, the Persians keeping score with chants, punishments, and rituals. It's tempting to judge, to recoil, to say, how barbaric, how bizarre. But then, you catch yourself. How many of your own customs would shock them? Would they laugh at you washing your hands with scented soap instead of sacred bull urine? Would they sneer at funerals with flowers stuck in the dirt, polluting the earth they guarded so carefully? Would they call it obscene to toss hair into a trash bin, or to let dogs sleep as pets, instead of warriors of purity? Perhaps your normal would be their scandal, just as theirs is your astonishment. The air cools. A breeze slides across your face. For the first time in this long walk through Persian strangeness, you feel less disturbed and more humbled. Every culture finds ways to hold back chaos, to stitch order into life. Some stitch with law, some with ritual, some with gardens, some with punishments. Persia stitched with all at once, weaving a tapestry of brilliance and brutality, beauty and fear, devotion and dread. You close your eyes. The noises blur. The faint trickle of Qanat water, the murmur of distant chants, the whisper of wind in cypress leaves. They soften, slow, lengthen. The Persians fade, their towers crumble, their gardens dry, their punishments cease. Yet their strangeness lingers, softened now by time, turned from horror to curiosity, from shock to lullaby. And so you breathe deeper. Let your shoulders sag. Imagine yourself not as a visitor, but as a sleeper, resting beneath Persian stars. The vultures no longer frighten, they glide gently, like dream guardians. The dogs no longer snarl, they curl at your feet watching over your slumber. The gardens no longer preach theology, they are simply shade, sweet-smelling, filled with water's hush. Even the punishments fade into symbols, sharp edges dulled by centuries. The empire that once demanded prostration now only asks you to rest. The kings who once terrified armies now whisper nothing at all. The harems are empty, their silk curtains long dissolved. The banquets are silent, the cups overturned, the fires cold, but the story remains, softened by the hush of history. And in that hush, you are safe. You are not bound by their rules, not lashed by their whips, not judged by their ordeals. You are only a listener, wrapped in the strangeness of the past, free to let it lull you. Strange things become soft when told in the dark. Even horror turns gentle when it is only memory. So let the imagery fade, like smoke curling upward. Let the vultures wheel farther, the rivers fall quiet, the kings retreat behind their vanished walls. Let the gardens linger just long enough to perfume your thoughts, then blur into dream. Let your breath deepen, your heartbeat slow, your eyes grow heavy. Because tonight the Persians' shocks are no longer yours to endure. They are stories, folded neatly into history, softened by centuries, safe to drift upon. Rest now in the hush of empire, in the quiet where even demons dare not tread. Rest because the night is long but gentle. Rest because the past has carried its weight and set it down. Rest because here, in this story, you are safe. Sweet dreams.